So first thing we will be discussing is Shani in the 7th house position. This is a very profound position for Shani because Shani is the 7th house of marriage. And so normally when you think of Shani Shiraya in the house of marriage, there are a few different karmas that show up. Now, before we start to talk about marriage, that the 7th house is also the house of relationship, or as I like to call it, the mirror, which is how we relate to other people, how we relate to the outside world. And it also has a specific affinity for our deals and agreements and our contracts that we make throughout our life. So when you're looking at Saturn in the 7th house, oftentimes it does indicate someone who would like to get married, but it doesn't always happen quickly. Maybe if Saturn is retrograde and there's some unique action that is quick to the Saturn, it will remediate this effect. But generally when Saturn is in the 7th house, there is a karma where the marriage can be delayed. I've also seen it be common that the person has a second marriage, that they have a divorce and then have a second marriage. I've also seen it in the case of people who have Saturn in the 7th house, that they become widow, that their partner dies. So there are all of these indications of the challenge of Saturn being in the 7th house. But the 7th house is indicated to the 7th sign, which is an exaltation position. So it's a good position in many ways. Now, when Saturn is in the 7th house, it shows that the person can be very kind of old-fashioned. This would be in the 7th house of marriage. So when it comes to the traditional role of a husband and a traditional role as a wife that has been consistent throughout the years, when Saturn is in a good position, we fall into these traditional roles. When certain other planets like Rahu, Ketu can change these traditional roles. And but when Saturn is in the 7th house, this Saturn is the planet which tests us. So that means that Lord Shiva sent your hubby down from heaven to test you, to challenge you, to push you. So people with the 7th house, it usually means that they will get married. But one of the things that is shown is that sometimes the marriage will not be easy. And when I say that the marriage will not be easy, that's because the partner is constantly testing you. That's because the partner is constantly challenging you. One of the ways of Shani's energy is the destroyer of the ego. So when you have Saturn in the 7th house, your hubby will destroy your ego. Your hubby will humble you. It does show from a remedial perspective. One of the best things that you can do is to be in service to your lover, is to be in service to your husband, is to be in service to your wife, is to see them as an emanation of the divine. Wherever I see someone has Saturn in your chart, I say try to picture Lord Shiva there. So try to picture your wife as as Ma Parvati. Try to picture your husband as Lord Shiva, and that the tests or challenges and growth that you are constantly experiencing with them is just for your spiritual benefit, is just for your spiritual maturity, is just for your spiritual evolution. The only reason that divorces often occur when Saturn is in the 7th house is because one person does not want to grow anymore. That means because the relationship foundation with Saturn in the 7th house is built upon growth. So if one person is staying the same while the other person is growing, it no longer becomes compatible. So it's important for a compatibility and remedial aspect that you and your partner are very devoted towards constantly learning and growing and evolving together as a foundational aspect of the relationship. So it's not just a difficult position. There are lots of positive position that will lead to marriage in this position, but it is the type of marriage that requires work and requires discipline and requires growth in order to maintain it and for it to be sustainable. So it's not the, let's just enjoy life every night type of marriage. Let's not, it's okay, we have responsibilities together. We have dharma together. We have karma together. And how can we together serve that? So there's this big service-oriented energy towards the partner in the 7th house. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Dr. Dharmesh.
Very well said about Saturn in the 7th house. See, Saturn not comfortable in the 1st house, but obviously it is very comfortable in the 7th house, because as per the direction of the chart, the 7th house is the west direction, and Saturn rise in the west, where the sun set, the Saturn rise. We'll discuss this in the Libra also, where the Saturn exalted. So as per the Kalpurus chart also, this is the exaltation point of Saturn. But being only the 7th house, what happened that the Saturn being placed in the 7th house? Why your marriage doesn't work? Because your opposite partner always try to come make you under the rule. He or she, whether it's a male or female, he always try to teach you law. He'll always try to come in the purview of a law, and always in the marriage life, love prevails, not a law. Law may be a different, but for a love, affection, you must understand the Jupiter. That is why here the Saturn has not been placed as a Karaka, even though you wish that your marriage life sustain for a long time, but still the Jupiter has given as a significator. Why? Because Jupiter gives you a duty. Saturn always makes you a discipline. So here, in your personal relation, what is the use of such kind of a discipline? What is the use of a kind of a law and regulation? Yeah, it doesn't work for them, those who are into the public life. I've seen the 7th house Saturn. They are very much famous. They are very much involved in the public work, social work, political work, but they fail in the marriage life. Maybe fail in the marriage life in the context that the one person dominate the will of other person, and that cannot be work in the marriage life, because marriage life is the where you have to at par with the both. There's no discrimination between the male and female or the husband or the wife, which the Saturn always try to dominate. See, Sun also dominate. Sun dominate because of the ego. Yet the Saturn dominate because of the rules. And every time the rules doesn't work, yeah, that's good for the good bonding for the years, for a long term. But for having a long term relationship, there's just some kind of a compromise should be there. And we all know that Saturn never compromise. Saturn never give up. It's always a deeds. So when the Saturn in the 7,000 person try to get married, it will always delay, because he want a pleasure. The person who's seeking the marriage, he need a pleasure, whereas Saturn force give you the duty, the karma, the deeds, and the deeds between the two persons. So it is always happen. See, nowadays there is a lot of comparison of a male and female during the marriage. Compatibility not on the base of the physical, but on the level of job they are doing, career they are performing, and that is why more and more male and more females are much involved in the career to get a good husband. This race was not there in the previous period. Previously, it has already been seen that the person to whom you are married is capable of handling you, or capable of earning something. So that the Saturn fit much. So here I don't feel, being a Saturn, he is very comfortable, because there is always some person who will come in your life and teach you discipline. If you got a wife, Saturn in 7th house, obviously your wife and your spouse will be your teacher and teach you a discipline. But other way also in their life to whom they face, because 7th house is a public appearance also, where you perform, where you face the crowd. There also you must follow the deeds, you must follow the discipline. So for the sake of a discipline, sometimes marriage doesn't work, because marriage is a kind of a law of fiction, not a law and discipline. So this is only one concept where this house, the Saturn, is not so comfortable for the personal life. But rest, the partnership that long lasts very long period, that is good. For your public appearance, it is good that you don't get scared. How much mass you face, you are encouraged, and you'll never be take a fear. So that way, this Saturn is very good for marriage life. It is only a matter of a discipline, over discipline, and ruling over the another person. So that's not making the personal life so much happy. But overall, the West Saturn in the 7th house is so comfortable. So that's my input about the 7th house Saturn. You may see the Libra Saturn by next Kṣaṇāti inputs. So please carry on.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. Everything you said about Saturn in the 7th house resonates. And I just wanted to let you know in my Navamsha, I have Saturn in the 7th house in the Matuna. So I have Saturn in my Navamsha in the 7th house. So I definitely, a lot of what you said really resonate with me. Now, first we get into Saturn Libra, which is the exaltation position for Saturn. And it's always interesting when we look at exaltation, because sometimes exaltation is with an enemy planet. But here we have exaltation with a friend planet. So Saturn is exalted in its friendly planet sign of Libra, whose ruler is Shukradeva. So you have this connection between Saturn and Venus in a very exalted kind of way. Now, Saturn is this planet of discipline, organization, and structure. And the strong karma of Libra is balance and harmony with all things. Libra is the peacekeeper. Libra is the middle way. Libra is the golden path. Libra is balance and harmony and peace with all things. However, the path to balance and harmony and peace with all things, it's not an easy path. It requires great discipline and organization and structure and focus for us to be in balance and harmony with everything that exists. Because constantly in life, there is a duality. There is one side of the extreme and there is the other side of the extreme. But one of the beautiful things about Saturn in Libra, maybe before they go through their Saturn return or go through their Saturn dasha, they do have extreme in their life. I've seen before the dasha and return of Saturn for an exalted Saturn that they can be homeless, they can have financial problems, they can have romantic problems. But as their Saturn dasha and Saturn returns, they overcome all of these obstacles. Then they get the happy marriage. Then they get the financial success. So, and if they didn't experience the challenge, then they would not be able to appreciate the reward. So one of my favorite things about Saturn in Libra is the native's ability to appreciate the reward. And the only reason that they're able to appreciate the reward is because they've gone through extreme experiences. They've gone through dualist experiences. They've had heartbreak. They've had bankruptcy. They've had certain challenges in their life. Maybe they've had addiction, I've even seen. And they overcome these things. And now they are a much more disciplined structure. And they are balanced. And they are moderate. And they are refined. And they are sophisticated. So I think of Saturn in Libra as a very refined and sophisticated energy. And it wasn't an easy road to get there. Maybe earlier part in the life before Saturn was heavily activated, you had to work out certain things. But once Saturn goes through its full activation, your pleasures begin to change and you begin to mature. And no longer the things that you once enjoyed will you currently still enjoy. So there is a lot of maturity to the senses. There's a lot of maturity to the romantic nature. There's a lot of maturity to the material nature. And I really, really like Saturn in Libra for throughout the transit of Saturn and throughout the dasha of Saturn, for someone to become very enlightened. Very enlightened in terms of something like non-duality, and to be very balanced, which means to not be extreme or dualistic in any way, to not be extreme. But usually they've had to go through certain experiences. And we've even heard of great tales of certain devas whose Saturn was exalted and they were exiled from their homeland, like Lord Rama. So there is this interesting position here. And but whenever you talk about Saturn being exalted, there's always going to be a mixed effect. So there are going to be extremes which the person will experience throughout their life. But eventually they overcome those extremes and they find balance and they find happiness and they find pleasure and they find discipline and stability and security in their life. But this increases the bala of the planet. And when the bala of Shani is increased, well, so are the adversities that it takes to get to the positive place as well. So again, this is another strong position for the grass is greener on the other side. And there are a few positions where I feel that very strongly about. And now I'm very excited to hear your insights as well, Dr. Dharmesh.
Yeah. See, as you mentioned that Libra being an exalted sign, for Virgo we ascend Uchagami. Here it has already entered its exalted sign. The Libra sign itself is a Kalpurusha 7th house sign. It's a rise in the west. Venus is a lord, and simultaneously the Saturn also a lord of a west. Although it is a northwest, but a western side planet. And this both combination comes together. That is why there is a evolution of exaltation of Saturn in the Venus sign. See, 7th house and Libra sign both teach you how to deal with the opposite person. Opposite in sex, opposite in gender, opposite in front of you. In any manners, if somebody is opposed or somebody is just in front of you, how to deal, how to reach. So this Saturn gives the duty, this Saturn gives the discipline, this Saturn gives the regularship with the opposite person. So here, by imposing certain duties, suppose imposing certain things in front of your opposite person, you also bound with the same rules and you also follow the same. So by Saturn in the sign of Venus being exalted, it is very much a pain and pleasure moment. I've seen exalted Saturn mature by 36, and after 36, there is nothing which makes them much hardship. So that much great thing Saturn can do after the age of 36. So in the Libra, when you meet some person, when some person is in front of you, you know, you are aware how to deal with them, how to serve them better, and how to create a memory in their mind. So Libra Saturn not putting more emphasis. It is quite good for seeking a pleasure, seeking a long-term relation, and seeking a good kind of companies you are surrounded. So that is the import of Saturn in the Libra sign. So now we can move to the 8th house.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh Ji. Saturn in the 8th house again, it's going to be the third time where now Saturn generally considered a malefic planet, is within an inauspicious house. And actually, there are a lot of benefits to having Saturn in the 8th house. Even though Saturn is a Dusthana position, Saturn is the Graha of death. This is the 8th house of death. It is also called the house of life. And there's always something I like to tell about my teacher, Dr. Lad, with this position. He would draw the patient on the board, and he would see that they have Saturn in the 8th house. And he would say, you will live a very, 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 very long life. You have a blessing from Lord Shani to live a very long life. But the downside is you'll have arthritis. And he used to laugh and laugh and laugh. Because the truth is this is the house of chronic disease. But Saturn is the house of, Saturn is Shani Shiraya, the slow mover. So death and disease will move slowly. So that means you will live long. But the thing is there is disease karma when Saturn is in the 8th house. So it's a very common position for arthritis. It's a very common position for dryness in different areas. It can have to do with difficulties with the reproductive or the digestive systems in the 8th house position. And so there is this strong energy here, which I think pushes from a remedial perspective of having Saturn in the 8th house. If you have Saturn in the 8th house, it's important that you learn how to take care of yourself. From a medical perspective, from a healing perspective. Again, Saturn is a Vata planet. So there could be a lot of pacification of Vata, which could help your longevity. Here's an interesting little tidbit. A lot of people tell me or ask me during consultation when I am going to die, And I tell them, well, it depends how healthy you are. And they're like, well, isn't there this exact moment where I am fated to die? I'm like, actually, there's 3 different types of karma. And a lot of the way that our chart sets up, depending on the karma in our 8th house, if we live certain healthy lifestyle, if we eat certain healthy diet, if we have certain healthy discipline in our life, we can live a much longer life. So having Saturn in the 8th house and taking care of your body, trying to make sure that you're always balanced and reducing the symptoms and challenges of your chronic challenges could add 5-10 years to your life. So in Ayurveda, they do the traditional therapy of panchakarma. And Saturn in the 8th house is one of the best positions for an individual to do panchakarma. I say if you have Saturn in the 8th house and you do panchakarma, you are adding 5-10 years to your life. And also, the 8th house is house of mystical, occult, esoteric, the experience of God outside of the organized religion. And so when Saturn is here, people have a certain inclination towards astrology. People have an inclination to Ayurveda. People have an inclination to religion outside of their birth religion. People have an inclination towards mysticism. But because Saturn is a somewhat scientific planet, always having that scientific aspect of their spirituality very much helps them. And it is good to have a practical understanding of spirituality for people who have Saturn in the 8th house. And that's why Jyotish, Ayurveda, Vaastu, these scientific applications of spirituality are very good for Saturn position in the 8th house. So those are just some of my sharings of Shani in the 8th house position. I am very excited to hear everything you have to share, Dr. Dharmesh ji.
Yeah, very well said. 2 main points I have to focus here is that the Saturn is a significator of 8th house. And here the Saturn is a significator of not a life, but death. See, 8th house, till you are alive, it is a life house. And once a person dies, it's a death house. So this is a house of fear. And Saturn is a karaka or a significant of a fear. So when they're applying the Parashara rule of a karako bhavanashe, if Saturn minus and 8th house being minus, so minus minus plus, so Saturn here cannot harm you. Being it's a karak for the fear, if Saturn plays in the 8th house, person never get fear from anything. Saturn having 8th house as a Kṣaṇāti, you have very well mentioned that the long life with the arthritis, that's a side effect. But long life, why long life? Because it remove the fear of death in your mind. When there, when you don't have a fear of a mind death in your mind, you live long. And continuously facing the problem or the thoughts about the life, how much I will live, what will happen, this kind of insecurity will make their life very shorter. So, as being a Karak of this house, it is very important that the Saturn place here will totally take care of your health, longevity, and lifespan. That way, you are lucky. Related to the fear, you will not get a fear. Being a Saturn in the, see, whenever the Saturn in the ascendant or Saturn in the 8th house, people have a less fear. So, less fear, so more enjoyment. It's also inclined toward the occult science because the 8th house is a rahasya, secret, which person have to decode from the environment. So being a Saturn in the 8th house, they are always inclining, as you are rightly mentioned, as a good astrologer, good mathematician you can find from this house. So ultimately there is no fear of yourself. And also this 8th house Saturn being a significant or karak of life and death, it will give you a good lifespan. So lifespan wise also you are good in the Saturn in the 8th house. By color and effect of a Saturn as a dark, we all know the Saturn is a dark and the black, so that black is come from the 8th house. So very subtle and very mature position for Saturn being in the 8th house. And aspecting here, it is aspecting the 10th house. There also it will give you the karmas, it will give you as per your deeds, whatever, and enlighten the deeds. It will directly aspect the second house. So control, you will not go out of the control in the money relation or anything, so there also it will control. And it is also aspecting your 5th house. So whatever your past balance deeds are there, that also can be utilized during this period. So all these four aspect of the Saturn being in the 8th house is a very important, that not getting a scare of anything, inclining toward the spirituality, and doing the all this Saturn in the 8th house, it will be a great journey for Saturn to be in the 8th house. So ultimately a good position for Saturn, maybe by sign number 8 under the ruleship of a Mars, maybe it will not be comfortable, but as a house it will be very well comfortable. So you may share some light on the Saturn in the Scorpio sign.
Thank you for your research and insights into Saturn in the 8th house. Very, very well put, sir. As we move to Saturn in Scorpio, we talked about how Saturn in Libra is exalted, and Saturn in Taurus is also pretty good. We talked about how Saturn in Aries is debilitated. So how good could Saturn in Scorpio be? And when you're looking at it from a deeper aspect, you're looking at it at the Saturn-Mars relationship. So it goes back to one thing that I said earlier about Saturn and Aries, which is the hamster and the wheel scenario. Constantly, life will be giving you situations where you're trying to reach your goals, but there are adversities, there are obstacles, there are challenges towards you reaching that cheese, towards getting the goals. And it can create exhaustion. But there is a very positive side of Saturn in Scorpio, which I always like to touch on, and that's that it's a very transformative vibration. However, the challenging side of it, it's usually not easy experiences that are transformative. So Scorpio is that transformative vibration. So when you combine that with the planet Shani, there are certain obstacles that are overcome, certain adversities, certain delays that when you overcome them, instead of just overcoming them and that being over, you change as a person. Sometimes I think of this as an analogy or symbol of you fall asleep as one person the one night and you wake up as another person the next day. Now, Saturn is Shani, the slow mover, so the person isn't changing over their night. But as they are working through their karmas, as they are working through their lessons, and this is a fixed vibration, they will start to change. They will start to transform. So it is a good position that for maturity and transformation, and it has an indication for the 8th house because Scorpio is the 8th sign. So oftentimes people with Saturn and Scorpio, they have affinity for the mystical. They have affinity for the occult. They like astrology. They like alternative medicine. So this is a very, very, very powerful positive vibration that comes with Saturn and Scorpio. But in general, the challenge of Saturn and Scorpio and everything like that is that in order to be reborn, sometimes you have to die. And in Spanish, they call this pequeño muertos, which means the small death or the miniature death. And in order to be reborn as a new person, you have to go through this death. But Saturn and Scorpio, sometimes people in their lifetimes, especially if there's a strong transit there, like the Saturn return, they feel like they're dying. They feel like they're and you know what? It's true. They are dying, but they are not dying physically. It's the old, false, illusionary shadow part of themselves that is dying, and a new, more spiritual, mystical, disciplined, and mature version of themselves is being reborn. And it's hard to let go of old habits, and it's hard to let go of old memories. But I've always found that Saturn in Scorpio is a very strong position in terms of pushing transformation into people's lives. And people with Saturn in Scorpio, let's say you meet them when they're 15, meet them when they're 20, meet them when they're 25, 35, 45, you'll feel like you're meeting a different person every time. And you will see the evolution within their character. So that's just a little bit of my insights into Saturn and Scorpio, and I would love to hear what you have to say, Dharmesh Bhai.
Yeah, very well said about the Scorpio. See, Saturn has one major opposition, that is a Mars. In the one sign of Mars, that is Aries, is doubleted, and this is the second sign of a Mars, where again the Saturn is not so comfortable. But the tendency of Aries is immediate response or immediately negative approach, whereas in the tendency of a Scorpio, we all know it's a cool, it's a slow effect of a poison. That is why a scorpion is there and the slow venom is there in his cell. So here the Scorpio sign itself is a sign of research, in-depth things, and analysis and detailed analysis. Whereas Saturn itself is also liking of detailing, doing all the things in the root cause. So here that combination somewhat works. Those having a Saturn in the Scorpio are the good researcher. They can go in depth of any subject, whatever the subject they have. So any house pertaining to that house, that the secret or the core things they will be liking. But in general, there is a chasing by receiving the appropriate things on the appropriate time. There's always been chasing, and Mars always need the things before time mature, and that is a clash between Saturn and Mars, the chasing of each other. Here it's not a purely chasing, but Saturn being in the Scorpio sign, here Scorpio sign itself is a detail and research, and Saturn is also likely to go in deep of everything. So that match somewhat, and pertaining to the house where it is placed, it is giving a partly a good result. The minus minus plus result, that the Saturn being a negative planet placed in the negative house of 8, so minus minus plus, so that is why Saturn are giving a good result related to the 8 Scorpio sign, and person gets the benefit out of it. Only thing is that there is some little fight inside one's nature, and that always show up. So this kind of only the limitation is there for the Mars sign when Saturn occupied, but ultimately it will be a good outcome for the native and getting a good pleasure. So this way the Scorpio Saturn has been described. Now we can move to the ninth house, again the very good and prospective house for Saturn. Please share your views.
Thank you. Yes, I like the ninth house for Saturn in this Dharma house in this Dharma position. But I just want to compliment you on your grateful insights into Saturn and Scorpio. Now, moving on into this position of Saturn in the ninth house, the ninth house is a house of religion, it's a house of spiritual evolution, and it's a house of Dharma. And Saturn is that planet of discipline. And so, and I always like to think of the link to our D9. We can look at the ninth house for part of our energy for how we can grow stronger into our D9. And so if you have Saturn in the ninth house is representing your spiritual path. So it shows from a remedial perspective, it's very important that you have discipline on your spiritual path. This would mean that you have a daily sadhana, that you have a daily practice, that you try to pray every day, that you try to do things within your religion every day. And often people who have Saturn in the ninth house are traditionalists when they come to religion. They might actually believe in the religion that they were born into, and they might be very disciplined in their religion. For example, people with Saturn in the ninth house, they can be very, Mars in the ninth house is more radical in religion, but Saturn in the ninth house is very rule regulated. So when you combine that energy of Saturn in the ninth house, they mix religion with rules, and we call that dogma. So this is the religion that the rules that each religion gives out, which we are supposed to follow and believe, like, the yamas and niyamas, or the 10 Commandments are two good examples. But the Saturn in the ninth house shows that you might be trying to follow these things, and it's your spiritual evolution and your spiritual growth to try to follow these things. Try to follow the yamas and niyamas. Try to follow the 10 Commandments. Try to follow the rules and regulations of a particular spiritual or religious path. But the downside of that is that a lot of religion and stuff like that, there's a power control element to it, where the church wants money, the temple wants money, so that they can keep going, and they're asking money for everyone that goes there. And so that's a part of religion that's not going to resonate with them. But following the old traditions, following the old religions, believing in God, trying to worship God, or through whichever mechanism rates for them. And it does show a more religious vibration in general. And I have seen people in the ninth house that are religious, but there is that scientific side of it too. So it's not like they're a Pisces Jupiter vibration where it's blind faith. Saturn in the ninth house is not what I would call blind faith, which is believing in religion without paying attention to it. But Saturn in the ninth house plays very close to religion, and they try to learn how religion can make them a better person. Because what's the sign associated with the ninth house? It's Sagittarius. It's all about becoming a better person. So they use religion as a tool to become a better person. They use a religion as a tool to connect to their inner guru. They use religion as a tool to connect to their higher self. And discipline from a remedial perspective has to be a big part of that. I don't dislike Saturn in the 9th house, especially if it's in a good position, if it's in a high dignity. It can very show someone who has a strong connection with God. How about you, Dr. Dharmesh? What would you say?
Yeah, very well said. See, that's again the two aspect of a Saturn, being a established rule by Saturn, and 9th house is a house of religion. So they have kind of orthodox rules, orthodox belief about the dharma. Saturn being a disciplined person, they don't like that somebody break the religious belief, they break the rules and regulation stipulated in the Bible or the Gita or the Quran. So they are a protector of a religion. I've seen sometimes that Saturn being in the 9th house is a fate, is a luck. So luck or fate, he will not bother because he know that he has performed the deeds. So nobody can stop his luck to flow him. But he always take care about the religious aspect, uh, dharma. So how to prevent the religion, how to spread the religion. So it's like a practice, profess, and propagate the religion with the thorough principle. It's not like us that we always compromise. Okay, this is not available, so we can go for this. No, Saturn has his own taste, own colors, so it doesn't compromise with any other colors. So these are the people. Saturn in the 9th house, they are a caretaker of a religion. They spread the religion also, and at the end, when they are about to leave the earth, they take the religious things with them, and they are doing good to the human being. So on the basis of a luck, there is nothing to worry because the deeds mature, and that result is called as a luck. So luck is nothing but whatever the destiny you have, and on that, whatever the matching action you are doing, that two things will simultaneously come together, you get benefited. So Saturn being in the 9th house, it is a very good placement for Saturn to get all the religious things very systematic. Foreign traveling, foreign policy, that's also comes under the 9th house. So there also the Saturn have a very strict discipline, and legal action one can be taken for this foreign traveling, foreign settlement, or any kind of a visa or that problem that people face. So as basically for the religious purpose, it is the Saturn is good. For circulation of or spreading of knowledge, spreading of religion, also it is, this Saturn is very very powerful. So ultimately the Saturn in the 9th house, dharma house, religious house, or house where you have always a scope. So if you are performing and performing deeds, and you are not being aware that some of the other day your deeds will be paid, then you will be always getting confusion. And that Saturn being in the 8th house, instead it is in 9th house, better judgment, better duty will be given as per the religious things, and the person are enjoying with the strict following. It's not that a liberal that living one or two things, or living the religious as per their wish, but very strictly following this religion. So that kind of a certain positive aspect I seen the Saturn in the 9th house. So obviously we'll move further for the Saturn in the Sagittarius. So please put your inputs on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dharmesh. Very illuminating on the 9th house. And it reminded me of something that I wanted to say, just a quick quote, and I believe it is biblical. And it says, "Let God's will, not mine, be done." And I think Saturn in the 9th house is a very strong position. Saturn is also Mahakala. So
Yeah.
it's all about surrendering to God's will. If we have Saturn in the 9th house, there's no greater remedy than the total surrender to the will of the universe, or to the will of the Devas, or to the will of God. Now, I will say that I have Saturn in Sagittarius. So this is my personal position in my chart. So I do have a little bit of personal experience to share. This is a sign of Dharma, and Saturn is a planet of responsibility. So when these planets are together, there is a lot of responsibility to your Dharma. And there is a lot of that is required of you. And before you go into Saturn returns and Saturn Dasha and everything, things might not be required of you. But then when you go into the Saturn return or the Saturn Dasha, all of a sudden your life becomes focused about Dharma. It becomes focused about responsibility. It becomes focused about all the things that you should be doing. How to be the best person that you could be. How to be the most moral person that you can be. How the most ethical person you can be. For example, I went into Saturn Dasha when I was just a teenager. I was just in my teenage years. And and my parents got divorced at the same time. So I had to learn how to take care of my siblings. And so very quickly I became an adult at the age of 15 in some ways. And so you can see this responsibility being pressured on you. Now, it is considered that Saturn has a neutral relationship with Sagittarius's ruler, which is Jupiter. But when Jupiter and Saturn are working together, some of the ways that the responsibility that is required of us and the growth that is required of us, it's very uncomfortable. In other words, it's been a very common theme in my life that how I'm forced to grow is happening quicker than I would like to grow. And I think that's part of what being Saturn and Sagittarius is that you are constantly forced to grow and become a better person. And it's very uncomfortable because you don't, because there's this element of change, and Sagittarius is a fire sign, and and you don't always want to grow. You don't always want to change, especially because Saturn is Shani, the slow mover. So it is also a general thing that people with Saturn and Sagittarius, they grow slowly and they change slowly, but they are sure to reach their Dharma. They are sure to reach their inner guru, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's usually going to happen at the end of their Saturn return and on their Saturn Dasha. At least that's my experience with being in the middle of my Saturn return and Saturn Dasha, that this is one of the greatest times of growth that I've ever experienced in my life so far.
Right.
And I would love to hear your thoughts on Saturn and Sagittarius as well.
Yeah. See, Sagittarius sign, as you described very well, is a religious sign where the performance of all the rituals are there, or belief, thoughts of related to your religion. What the difference between this Sagittarius being a religious, here the Saturn is a spiritual. So there's a conflict between religious and spirituality. If the Saturn is very powerful, then you will be strongly following the spirituality, yoga, dhyana, meditation, where you always try to lift your own soul or enlightenment. Whereas on the other side, if the Sagittarius sign is powerful by some benefit planet or Jupiter being placed very well in the Sagittarius, then it happens that the religiousness is more important than your spirituality, and you have to convert into the religious things. Whatever the things you are doing for yourself, that you have to do for the others also. So on the prospect of the spirituality from the Saturn and the religious nature of a Sagittarius sign, when these two combination comes together, then obviously it is a very, very good and rare combination. So Saturn being in the Sagittarius sign, he doesn't have to prove his religiousness. He doesn't have to prove how deep he has a knowledge about the religion or the subject, because opposite to you, that the Sagittarius sign is always been recognized with a knowledge and knowledgeable person. So you will not face any problem when the Saturn is there. And presently the Saturn return is going on in the Sagittarius sign, and Jupiter is about to come to the Sagittarius in the November, but Rahu is already being settled here. So that is also a kind of change one can expect. So I like this Saturn in the Jupiter sign in the Scorpio, Sagittarius, being a very good combination of East and West and religious and the spirituality. So that way, in that context, it gives a very good result. So that's a positive inputs of Saturn in the Sagittarius sign. Now we can move to ahead to the 10th house.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. And one thing you said that was really interesting that I thought you would find interesting, which agrees with that, with something you said, is that I pray in 3 different languages. As a Saturn in Sagittarius, I pray in Sanskrit. I pray in English. And I also pray in the language of my ancestors, which is Hebrew.
Wow.
So that is this thing where more spiritual than religious, like you say, because I like to pray in many different languages. And also I study gods of other religion too. I study the Viking god. I love the Viking gods. I love the Mayan and Aztec gods. So I love all different religion, and I'm not particularly, I think all religions are equal.
Very good, very good. That's a good thing.
Now, as we move on to the, and what you said made me think about that spiritual focus. Now, as we move into the 10th house position of Saturn, that's a Karaka position for Saturn, because the 10th sign is Capricorn. So this is the natural house of Capricorn. So yeah, it takes a lot of work for you to grow and evolve in your career, but this is one of the best positions in the chart for reaching high position in career, reaching high position in status, reaching high position in recognition. Yes, maybe it'll happen after Saturn return. Yeah, maybe it'll happen after Saturn Dasha. You have to have Saturn activated before it's going to really start to take full activity. But without a doubt, Saturn in the 10th house shows prominence in the career. It shows discipline in the career. It shows structure in the career. And for any career to grow, you need discipline, structure, and organization. So that's part of the reason why Saturn is the Karaka position for the 10th house, because all of the energies of Saturn are very conducive to the growth energies of the 10th house, because it requires discipline and structure and organization to really have your work and your career and all of your, to make a difference in the world. You know, it's not just about making money. When we look into the 10th house, I also think about the difference we make in the world, the mark that we leave on the world, the change that we leave on the world. Because whenever our 10th house is activated, there's a lot of people in the world receiving what we have to express. So that means we have this potential to make a very impact or make a very deep change on the world. So even though Saturn has its normal affinities for delays, obstacles, adversities, and challenges, as mentioned, Saturn is a planet that delays, but it does not deny. And so I do like the Karaka position for Saturn in the 10th house, and Saturn's natural 10th house being the natural house of Capricorn. It doesn't mean that it's an easy process for you to become famous. It doesn't mean that it's an easy process for you to become the boss. It doesn't mean that it's an easy process for you to become independent and successful, but it means that certainly without a doubt, in due time, you will get there, my friend, especially as you work through your karma with Saturn in its dasha, in the sati sati, in the Saturn return. You can expect a lot of rewards coming through in the 10th house. It's just, it doesn't mean that there's not obstacles along the way, but in generally, I like this position for success in the long term in the career. How about you, Dr. Dharmesh?
Yeah, See, this is a point where deeds meet the deeds. Deeds, that's a Saturn, and 10th house we believe as a deeds. So deed exactly fit its own socket. So that's a great things about the deeds. And here the real performance comes. And that is why, as you rightly say, you have covered 80-90% of what I also possess the knowledge. So that's a perfectly a deed meet with the real deeds, and that's a discipline in the work. And whenever you are serious about your work, when you are continuous pursuance of your work, dedication is there, then why not the result is there? And that result is always assured by the Saturn. So Saturn being a deeds and karaka of a 10th house, significator of the 10th house, it will give when it sit in the 10th house, so it will makes your way very smooth. You'll always get a helping hands so that your deeds complete very faster. You are not behind the name. That's the main thing in the Saturn in the 10th house and Saturn in the 7th house. You are not behind the name. They all are the sun people who are behind the name, fame, and recognition. So, being Saturn in the 10th house, you are only and only focusing how the things are working, how you can perform your deeds, and how you can complete your pending karmas. So, on these three aspects, when Saturn is very much focused and Saturn is very well placed in the 10th house, then ultimately there will be, even though there is no name, fame, and recognition for your work immediately, but people will always remember your work as being deeds being directed by the real force of a work. Then your deeds will be appreciated not only for the sake of a name and say name, fame, and recognition, but you are doing unconditionally. You are doing your job, you are doing your work on the basis or on the thoughts that it is your duty, and that makes this house Saturn very powerful. Except a debilation Saturn here, the obviously all these Saturns in the any different sign, when placed in the 7th house, it is nothing like the 10th house, it is nothing like this. And ultimately your deeds will be ending, and then because of this, no pending karmas are there, and you will get a liberty or a moksha immediately. So this way, the Saturn to be judged in the 10th house by career, by not approaching much to the father, not fear about the government or the politics. They are just continuous performance of their work. So I like that Saturn in the 10th house, as you too like this house. But now we'll see how the Saturn gives result in his own house, Capricorn. Please throw some light.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. Your discussion on Saturn in the 10th house was in direct alignment with how I feel about it. As we move on to Saturn and Capricorn, it's important to mention that Saturn has a more affinity for Aquarius. Why does Saturn have more affinity for Aquarius? Because that's the Mula Trikona position for Saturn. So even though Saturn has some strength in Capricorn and great strength in its natural sign, there's still another sign that it's even a little more comfortable in. However, but having Saturn in Capricorn is not always an easy vibration, but it's one of the greatest vibrations in the chart for the person being successful, for the first person being happy, for the person being prosperous. It's a great position, especially because of the 10th sign, being prosperous within the work, being prosperous within the career. But one of the things that Capricorn Lagna does, as far as my experience when I look at the karma of Capricorn, is there's a direct relationship between challenge and success. And Saturn increases in its own sign, the power, the bala of Saturn is increased. So even though the success is also increased, so is the challenge to get there also increased. so is the work to get there more increased. Saturn and Capricorn are the hardest workers. Saturn and Capricorn are willing to do whatever it takes to help their career grow. And it's a natural vibration to them. But they are supposed to deal with challenges, obstacles, adversities. This might be the strongest sign or the strongest conjunction in which I say the grass is greener on the other side. And that's a common thing with Saturn, but it's especially true with Saturn and Capricorn, because you have to go through obstacle. You have to go through delay. You have to go through work. You have to go through acting like a servant. And it's very interesting which house Saturn is sitting in to see where your responsibility and karma is required of you. But when you meet your karmic debt and you pay your karmic debt, then only the greatest rewards and success and prosperity and happiness is awaiting for you. So does show up as adversity, but also there is no greater reward sometimes when Saturn is in Capricorn. So it's a very, very powerful position for Saturn. And I'm very curious to hear your insights, Dr. Dharmesh.
Yeah. See, as a Capricorn and Aquarius, as you mentioned that more comfortable sign is Aquarius. Here what happens that out of 3 earth sign, Taurus, Virgo and Capricorn. See, fire is fire, water is water, and air is air. But here in the earth sign, there's 3 layer of earth has been mentioned. So what we call as a ground earth is a Taurus sign. Taurus is a ground earth on which we stand. A Virgo sign is under the earth, what we call as inside the earth, or where the mining activities has happened. The beauty of the Capricorn is that we have all 4 elements like fire, earth, air and water. But out of the 5 element, basic element, the ether level was missing. That ether level lies in the Capricorn. Capricorn is nothing but the earth, raised earth, means earth, above that earth there is a sky. So the Capricorn sign denotes the sky. See, Saturn also have 2 colors. One is sky blue color, that is a Capricorn, and one is a dark black color, that is a Aquarius. So Aquarius, it is a more strong and hard effect of a Saturn, dark shade of a Saturn, or strongest will of a Saturn, whereas Capricorn is just a spreading. It's just a spreading like a sky. We all say the sky has no limit. The same way Saturn also have a no limit. Being Saturn in their own sign, in Capricorn, they are the lucky people that their deeds will be mature very fast. Being in the beneficial of our own sign, the Saturn having a benefit of our own sign, we often see that the Capricorn people never face such a Kṣaṇāti second or third phase. As like Aquarius people also not finding much difficulty during the Kṣaṇāti, because from childhood they have been trained. So those having a Saturn in own sign like in Capricorn, they are from their childhood they are being trained in discipline. So how this discipline will be break up? So that good things the Saturn gives in the Capricorn, that it's being a earth ether level sign. It always gives all the variety of deeds what you can able to perform. Here there's not a rigidity as like Aquarius we are going to discuss, but here Capricorn, the lightest mood of a Saturn you will find, and sky and cloudy things, cloudy environment, these all are being with the Capricorn Saturn. So Capricorn Saturn is a kind of a result oriented sign, but on the different aspect, not as strong, as hard or stubborn like Aquarius. So I like the combination of Saturn being in the Capricorn sign. In all the any houses, it will be own sign only and not going to give any negative effect. So that's all about the Saturn being in the own sign and how it is affecting the Capricorn. Later on, we'll see in the Aquarius. So that's my submission. We can move ahead to the 11th house. Again, the strongest position of Kalpurus for the Saturn. Please give some enlightenment of Saturn in the 11th house.
Thank you for your instruction and information on Capricorn Saturn. It very resonates very deeply. As we look into Saturn 11th house, which is the position of my Saturn, I'm also in Aquarius Lagna, so that 11th sign goes to the 11th house. So I do know a little bit from personal experience about Saturn in the 11th house as well. And when I look at the position of Saturn in 11th house, you're looking at Kama, and it is aspecting the 5th house. So the people who have Saturn in the 11th house, they can have very big dreams. They can have very big aspirations. They can have very big thoughts, and they have great imagination. And they imagine, imagine some creative thoughts, but it's not like a Venus type of creativity. It's more a scientific type of creativity. And the vibration of the Saturn in the 11th house, it's also the house of friendship. So this means that usually friends are very important to the people with Saturn in the 11th house. But again, Saturn can also represent separation and isolation. So I've lived in some different places across the world, and the way it has been with my friends is I have certain friends in childhood. We will not talk for 10, 15 years, and then all of a sudden we become best friends again, and we start hanging out again. And now we're best friends like we never even missed a beat, even though we haven't saw each other in 5 years, in 10 years. So one of the things that's very interesting about the friendly karma, which is associated with Saturn in the house, is Saturn does show loyalty within friendship within the 11th house, but it also shows that your friends can be distant at some times. But in my experience, when you pick up with the true old friend, when you pick up with the true old ally, especially because Saturn is Mahakala, the Lord of Time, it doesn't matter how much time that you've missed. It's like picking right up where you started the last time that you two got to spend time together. So I do think Saturn in 11th house is a good time for being able to experience a deep friendship, regardless of how much time that you spend with the person. Also Saturn in the 11th house is a house of community. And the 11th sign is Aquarius, which is a sign which relates to wanting to be a part of the community. So Saturn has a natural signification point, and even though Saturn is kind of the outsider kind of vibration, and I also have a strong Rahu element in my chart, that nothing is more important to me than having a community. Nothing is more important to me than working with my colleagues. Nothing is more important to me than sharing teachings and sharing knowledge and sharing information. And for me, feeling like my community is my family. And so having Saturn in the 11th house, sometimes your friends, your colleagues, your spiritual community, you value them the same way that you would value your family. And there is a strong desire or need. In the 10th house, it's how can we make a difference within our career? In the 11th house, it's how can we make a difference within our community? So that's especially with Saturn in the 11th house. So those are some of my reflections on Saturn in the 11th, and I am very excited to hear yours as well, Dr. Dharmesh.
Yeah, very well said about the house. As I move ahead from 10th house, when the Saturn moves to the 11th house, that's also a Kalpurusha good house for the Saturn. And somewhat about your desire, if somebody speak about the desire fulfillment, here Saturn only gives a desire fulfillment for which the deed has been performed. So it will first judge whether you are capable, whether you are eligible, whether you have performed your part, then obviously it will give you a gain. Immediately, it's not a Jupiter to give a gain, but after the discipline, after following a rules and regulation, and after performing deeds, it will certainly gives very good things. When Saturn is in the 11th house after the age of 36, the all the desire fulfillment will happen faster. Even first cycle of Saturn by 30 also it start, but actually the Saturn mature by 36, we all know. So after 36, all the desire will fulfill. As like you say about the friends, let me put why this friendship long lasts for these people, because they always expect that much only which they can able to give back. So they only expect certain things which they are also willing to do for others. It is not like a Venus that one side friendship only and only getting and getting, not giving back to anything. It is not like this. So Saturn here in the 11th house, the expected gain will be also very expected, and after the putting the efforts and deeds with the social and the friend circle also, it is a very good. And we believe that the 11th house is a social house where the people meet each other. That is also by this way it is giving a good result. And by keeping oneself into the discipline, the person will be achieving everything systematically and very well. So Saturn being in the 11th house, friends also very, with the intention to keep the relation for the long term, not a short while they think about it, and relation may sustain lifelong. For gain, after putting efforts, if the gain is expected or gain is been achieved, there's nothing bad about it. And all about the social medias also, this is a slow movement in somebody's PR. So as per this 11th house Saturn, I am happy that the person's own self desire will fulfill. Here the Saturn is aspecting your 5th house and 1st house simultaneously. So it will activate your past life deeds as well as you always aware you about your this life deeds, so that by doing both simultaneously you'll be enhancing yourself very faster. So I like that Saturn in the 11th house. According to that, it will be always giving good result. So we can proceed for the Aquarius Saturn, how it will give. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh, for your insights into Saturn on the 11th house. Now, as we look into Saturn in the Aquarius position, we look at its Mula Trikona position as classified by Rishi Parashara. And when you're looking at this classification of the Mula Trikona position, it's going to create more strength. It's going to create more power. And this is a very intense position for Saturn. There are many positives associated with this position, but there are some challenges, especially in the character or personality of a strong Saturn Aquarius individual. Now, when Saturn is in Aquarius, I always say that part of the dharma of the Aquarius vibration is the evolution of our consciousness. Again, we do remember that Shiva is connected to Lord Saturn, and the word Shivaya actually means consciousness. And so if you look at the symbol, the water bearer who bears the pot, well, what do you think he's holding in that pot? I believe that he's holding consciousness within that pot, pure awareness, or what we might call Sat, the ultimate truth. But he spills it because he wants to share that with the world. He wants to share that with the community. He wants to share that consciousness. So there is a strong energy here when Saturn is Aquarius for the evolution of someone's consciousness. I think when people have Saturn in Aquarius, let's not call it spiritually, but in terms of their awareness of truth, their awareness of right, their awareness of wrong, their awareness of higher powers, their awareness of the planets, their awareness of spirituality, that constantly throughout their life with Saturn in Aquarius, they become more and more aware. And from a dharmic perspective, you know, if the Saturn in Aquarius is in the first house, in the fifth house, or in the ninth house, then on a deeper level, their consciousness is supposed to be aligned with the advanced universal consciousness. So that's why Aquarius is called innovative. But it's not a Venus type of creativity. It's an intellectual type of creativity, which means in some ways they're able to perceive into the future because they notice trends, they notice certain things, and they're able to kind of scientifically understand what's coming. It's a different type of intuition, but Aquarius has intuition too. And that's what leads to innovation as well. And so with the Saturn in Aquarius position, those are some of the positive sides of it. And they tend to be very pragmatic, and they tend to do what works, and they tend to make a very big difference in their community and in society. Now, the challenging side of Saturn in Aquarius is they are very idealistic. This means that there's this one side which is practical and another side which is idealistic. And when Saturn is in Aquarius, Aquarius sees the way that things should be in the future. When you're able to get an intuition about how things should be in the future, you forget the current condition of how things truly are now. I would like to think that in 100 years, 200 years from now, we won't have corrupt politicians. That's impossible right now. 3/4 or more of politicians are corrupt. So there is this vibration of, okay, the challenging side of Saturn in Aquarius is even though you can see the innovation, even though you can see where we're going as a community, even though you can see where we're going as a society, you still have to be realistic about where the rest of the world is right now, and you have to live within that realistic world. It doesn't mean you can't help bring people to pure consciousness, Om Namah Shivaya. You can help bring people to a higher understanding, but you ain't going to bring the whole world there. It's only the changing of the yugas that's going to bring the whole world there. And we're not capable of making that. So we do have a role, but it's not the ultimate role. So that's something to consider as well for the Saturn in Aquarius. And would love to hear your insights on Saturn in Aquarius, sir.
Yeah, you describe Aquarius Saturn more than you describe all the 12 signs. So maybe it's a Saturn own house, and he wish that somebody should give my real result. So that you have put inside, outside this result for the people. See that as we have already differentiate both, that this is a two sign of a Saturn. One is a Capricorn and another is Aquarius. Here, when the Saturn in the Aquarius, it's more hard, more strong, more disciplined. And here, the in whichever house this Aquarius sign is there, Aquarius is basically, as you mentioned, is a sign of hiding the things. And Saturn is also doesn't like to be more in limelight. So simultaneously, you are performing your deeds, you are doing everything, but you don't like to give somebody gives you credit. So that kind of a Saturn, by performing everything, still also not expecting anything, that is the greatest thing of today's time. So people having an Aquarius Saturn will always be satisfied with their own deeds and never been complaining. They are getting all the kind of gains also. Whatever the expected gain is there, that also they will be able to get. And by keeping the Saturn in the Aquarius is a purity of a Saturn, where the Saturn have a full say what to do, where to do, how to do. This all things will be very much ready when the Saturn is an Aquarius sign. So even in the transit, when the Saturn come into the Aquarius sign, people are more disciplined, people are more courageous, and they are focused on their deeds. So being in the Mula Trikona Saturn, and own sign Saturn. Saturn certainly have a good the vibration, good positive energy of this house and this sign, and particularly it will be a more strongest position of a Saturn being seated in the Aquarius. So rest all the things you have covered very well. So we can move ahead to the last destination of a Saturn in the Sagittarius. Please we continue in the 12th house Saturn.
Thank you. That was very insightful into Saturn Aquarius, Dr. Dharmesh. Thank you so much for staying up late with me. As we move into Saturn in the 12th house position, this is, again, the third example. We talked about how Saturn 3, 6, 8, 12. This is the second example of Saturn-induced Dana position, when normally you think, oh, this is a horrible position. It's really not that bad of a position. Many successful leaders, many successful people will have Saturn in the 12th house. Now, the thing that's interesting about the 12th house is it has to do with our subconscious mind. And so that means that the individual might not be so tested in their conscious state. They could be tested in the dream world. They can be tested in other states. So they can escape, not that they can escape their karma, but they can escape having to think about their karma on a daily basis. And this is a perfect example of President Trump, who has Saturn in the 12th house. I don't think he's thinking about all the karma he's creating, but I'm sure because he has Saturn in the 12th house that he's dreaming about it. Because you can't help it. And you work out these tests and challenges and obstacles in the subconscious realm. Now, also there's an affinity for foreign and exotic lands. And Saturn can show distance. And so sometimes there's this position when Saturn is in the 12th house, people go to different countries, people travel to different places, people relocate in certain countries for a different amount of time. And just in general, they can have an affinity for alternative cultures. They can have affinity for alternative spiritualities. So these are some of the positive aspects of the Saturn in the 12th house. But the Saturn in the 12th house is also Moksha Bhava. And Moksha Bhava is loss. And sometimes this house is called the house of loss. So when Saturn returns, Saturn Dasha, Saturn Antardasha begins to activate a Saturn in the 12th house, the person has to go through certain losses. Sometimes those losses are material because Saturn aspects the 6th house. Sometimes those losses are more about our attachments, which is spiritual, and that comes from Saturn being positioned within the 12th house and in the house of Pisces. Sometimes when Saturn gets activated in the 12th house, we might lose a family member or we might lose a pet. Or, and even though the 6th house is acute illness and the 8th house is chronic illness, I've heard the 12th house of kind of sustained illnesses, which kind of come and go throughout your entire life. Or as they say, prolonged illnesses. So when Saturn is in the 12th house again, it does indicate certain strange prolonged illnesses. I think our president is of the mental nature, especially with this K2 moon and Rahu sun co-aspect. Now, as you look in the Saturn in the 12th house position, Saturn is a planet of discipline, and the 12th house is the Moksha Bhava. Now, when I talk about moksha, I'm not talking about Mahasamadhi, although we all know that is one aspect of moksha, is to end the cycle of reincarnation. But other aspects of moksha is to not have attachment to the body, is to not have a fear of death, and is to not be afraid of dying when the time of dying will come for us. And our attachment to our body and our attachment to our life, especially at the time of dying, creates heavy karma. So when Saturn is positioned in the 12th house, part of the remedy part of the evolutionary energy, which I think will eventually help get the soul to the Mahasamadhi, is to practice to not have fear of dying, to practice not have attachment of the fear of body, and to think of death as not the loss of something, but the transition from one place to another place. Because according to reincarnation theory, that's exactly what is happening. So let's replace the fear of death with an understanding that nothing ever really dies, ever. And that's part of the remedy, I think, of Saturn in the 12th house. But sometimes people with Saturn in the 12th house, if it's in a difficult position, they might struggle with the fear of death. But evolutionary speaking, they are to conquer their fear of death. What you say, Dr. Dharmesh?
Yeah, 12th house is a last destination of a Saturn. And as you say rightly, that there is a negative house with a negative planet. So it is a minus, minus, plus. Saturn also a discipline, also a deeds performer. And I believe 12th house is a house of nature. Whatever things you are not able to control or able to do with your own physical limitation or with a high expectation, that all goes to the nature. 12th house, that's a loss, that's a nature. 12th house is reincarnation, moksha, loss, whatever the things which are beyond as a human being control and being controlled by the nature, this all lies in the 12th house. And Saturn being in the 12th house, it is always being judgment. It will be always balance your things. It is not incline on the either side and always been in the straight prudential level where it will always be guiding star. So 12th house is a house of nature and Saturn is a discipline or the duty speed. So it will purely gives your deeds, whatever things are left out and not been realized. About moksha, about your hospitalization, about the fear, all things covers under this 12th house. And Saturn minus 12th house as good as minus, it gives a good result on time. On time, the nature will give you everything. If your 12th house Saturn is there, just be quiet, don't be get anxiety, and you see your things will be always been paid, always been given on the right time. So Saturn in being a 12th house is aspecting the 6th house, as you rightly mentioned, as well as second house also it is aspecting that. There also it is from loss how to recover and how to gain, that also it will teach you. And in the it is also aspecting the ninth house, so how to make your future better, there also it advice. So accordingly this, the Saturn being in the 12th house, it's being sometime called as a blessing from the nature, that nature will give all the dues, nature will give you all the punishment, whatever things you are being awarded, that will be for sure sort. So during dasha or during transit, definitely you will be able to affect with the 12th Saturn, and you will be either rewarded, either you will be surprised and being given some negative effect. So altogether this Saturn in that this 12th house is not considered bad, is also one of a good house for the Saturn. So lastly we will focus on the Saturn in the Pisces sign, how it will give the result. Please put your inputs.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. And it just reminded me of a joke Dr. Lad used to say when he saw Saturn in the 12th house. He used to go to the client, he used to go, "You have Saturn in the 12th house. You will become enlightened. You'll become enlightened." And they would get so excited. And he just was saying as a joke, but it does help you on your path to enlightenment.
Yeah.
It really does. Through sadhana, structure, discipline. Now, as we look at Saturn in Pisces, this is a very interesting combination because Pisces as a karmic vibration is about having faith, is about being connected to Svarga and the earthly realm, is about being in a balance between two places. But however, Saturn here represents the mundane world. Saturn represents responsibility, structure, and organization. Sometimes people with Saturn in Pisces can feel like they're being pulled in two different directions. On one side of the direction, you have your material responsibilities, you have your family responsibilities, you have your job responsibilities. And on the other side, you'd like to focus on prayer, you'd like to focus on astrology, you'd like to focus on palmistry, you'd like to focus on Vaastu. So it's all a juggling effect when I see Saturn in Pisces, how to balance our responsibilities with our more Pisces type interests and hobbies and everything like that. Because Pisces can get very wrapped up in what I call living in your own little treehouse. But Saturn is saying, come out of the treehouse. Come out of the treehouse, come do some things here on Earth, then you can go back on your treehouse. Spend half of the time in the treehouse, spend half of the time here on Earth trying to make a difference here. So Saturn in Pisces is a very good position for, but it can be ungrounded. Saturn in Pisces can be a little ungrounded because Saturn is Vata and Pisces can be very up in the air. So sometimes when Saturn in Pisces is activated, they could be kind of living in their own little world, as they say, which means the way that they're perceiving things can be different than the way that things are normally perceived. And there's nothing really wrong with that. That means they have a unique way of perceiving. But there is this general vibration here. Saturn in Pisces, it's not an enemy position. It's not a friend position because you're looking at Saturn and Jupiter's neutral relationship with each other, but they're both spiritual teachers planet. So this combination, I think, is a very good combination for lessons in wisdom on a spiritual level because of the Pisces vibration, but also lessons and learning on responsibility material level because of the Saturn vibration. The only challenge of that is that you might feel like you're being pulled in two different directions at one time. You'd like to focus on your spiritual, but you're pulled to your mundane material. You'd like to focus on making some money, but you can't stop thinking about your spiritual path. So again, you have to understand that I think with Saturn and Pisces, it's all about trying to balance out that energy, which is not necessarily easy, but a true evolved Saturn Pisces vibration is both very grounded in and successful here in the physical world and also spiritual, philosophical, and religious at the same time. So I've noticed that. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Dr. Dharmesh.
Yeah. See, we know that Moksha Trikon has a 3 sign, Cancer, then we have Scorpio and Pisces. Cancer, the Saturn is not favorable as an enemy sign. Same like in Scorpio also, it is not favorable being as but Pisces being as a Moksha Trikon last part, and Saturn also being a seeker of this moksha. When these two forces match together, that can create a miracle. It will enhance the chances of going into the moksha very fast. Being a Saturn as a spiritual person, it pures insidely the person's thoughts, beliefs, and everything. Whereas Pisces is a highly emotional sign, and a watery sign, which cures all the negativity from the outside. So both combination is very good when the Saturn in this combination of a Pisces. That is the ultimate time of spirituality yoga, as a Adhyatmic yoga we call. There is a better time as a Jupiter sign and Saturn enters. So that also sometimes create the spirituality and person become more and more inclined towards the spirituality. So Pisces Saturn has never been heard negatively in any cases. And being it is a Kalapurusha 12th house also, it has being a duty of a Saturn to fulfill all these losses, to recover and to disease, to being cured. So this all hospitalization, this all are the part of the Saturn domain. And Saturn being in the Pisces always been giving a good aspect of the life, showing the emotional to the practical, both the aspect, because Pisces itself is an emotional sign, but the Saturn is not so emotional, is a practical. So emotional things convert into the practicality and giving something very fast result. So Pisces Saturn is more comfortable than the any other sign, and being a ultimate aim to be chances of moksha, chances of not taking again birth, that will be very sure by Saturn in the sign of Pisces. So this is all about the Saturn in the Pisces, and hope viewers has like this insights, and there are lot many things can come out, but at the restraint of our time we are cut short and giving the more cream area of the people with the different dimension. So this is the Saturn about the Pisces, and the last sign where the spirituality, they doesn't have to go to any lecture or to hurt someone, it develop insidely, and some or the other way it will gives a very very good result to the native life. So that's all small input of my for the Saturn in the Pisces.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmesh. I just wanted to say to you, Dr. Dharmesh, and all of our viewers on both of our channels, DM Astrology and Kṣaṇāti Jyotish, I want to thank you, Dr. Dharmesh, for sharing this time with me to continue our series on unique influences on the planets in each house and sign. This was a very, very comprehensive session on Saturn, which I think our viewers will enjoy. And I want to thank our viewers, and you should all know Dr. Dharmesh and I will be planning to focus on another planet soon as well. So thank you so much, Dr. Dharmesh. It was an honor and pleasure to share this time with you. Namaste. Om Namah Shivaya.
Namaste.